Uju Eni, imagineNATIVE, Flying Post First Nations named in Dunjaba. Good morning and welcome to day 3 of the imagineNATIVE Institute's Industry Days. My name is Jamie Lee Reardon. I am the lead Institute Coordinator at imagineNATIVE and I am from Flying Post First Nations in Treaty 9 territory. I have long brown hair, I am wearing glasses, Indigenous made earrings, a button-up shirt, and I'm sitting on a computer chair, and behind me is a brick wall. I'm holding a cute dog in my hands. We at imagineNATIVE acknowledge that this land is located on a present-day Deed Toronto. Toronto is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We acknowledge the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a treaty whose spirit is one based in collective stewardship and reciprocity. We take the spirit of this covenant to the core of our operations as we bring artists and audiences from many nations across the globe together through our various initiatives and activities. Please take a moment to think of the land you currently reside upon, wherever you may be, and acknowledge those who went before and those yet to come. Day 3 of Industry Days starts off with a thought-provoking and timely keynote speech from Ojibwe filmmaker Evelyn Pakinewatik, offering their view on the future of film. You don't want to miss the IN Originals 2020 and 2021 panels with filmmakers who created The Lost Lemon Mine, Disappearing Moon, Discretion, Disclosure, and Little Bird. The Lost Lemon Mine premiered at imagineNATIVE in 2020, and Disappearing Moon, Discretion, Disclosure, and Little Bird are screening in the imagineNATIVE IN Originals short program. The creation of animation with creators from the films Beneath, Nouveau Rico, and We Are All Different, that is also screening at this year's program. And you won't want to miss the pre-lunch TikTok from the hilarious Adrian Aliak. Our last panel of the day will be moderated by Tracy Rector from Neotero as part of the Kin Theory series, Building Community and Abundance Across Indigenous Creative Networks, supported by Blue Ant Media. And of course, if you're registered for tonight's networking drag bingo event hosted by Josie Baker and Weird Alice, please keep an eye out for your bingo cards that will be sent to your email this afternoon. Here at imagineNATIVE Institute, we are wishing all the micromeetings leaders and Indigenous creatives a day filled with great networking and meaningful connections. Chimagwich for tuning in. Hope you enjoy. Bamapi. Say bamapi, Ashke. Bamapi.
Directors.ca.
Ani Bosho, Ninduko Wabanankoi, Nabising Ndonjibama Kododam. My name is Evelyn Pakinewatik. I am Anishinaabe from Nipissing First Nation. I am a director of documentary and narrative films, and I am currently working towards my first feature film. I am also disabled. I have a chronic illness, which makes it very hard for me to work in this industry. To describe myself, I am a fair-skinned Ojibwe person with mid-length black hair in 2 braids. Behind me is a brightly lit office/studio with several houseplants and family pictures on the wall. I prefer to be referred to by my name, Evelyn or Ev, but I do not mind they, them pronouns, he, him pronouns, or she, her pronouns. I have worked in film since 2018. And while my experiences in production are not as extensive as many of my peers, my experiences in navigating the industry as a disabled person are exhaustive. imagineNATIVE has invited me to talk with you a little about accessibility in filmmaking. So, traditional Indigenous storytelling is inherently fluid, both in terms of adaptive storytelling and in terms of perception and understanding. The core value stays, but takes on new meaning with multiple interpretations at each retelling. Many of these stories are developed over the course of generations, and it is the responsibility of many to hold them and to keep them safe. Storytelling becomes a duty as much as it is an art form, with an understanding that stories have the power to shape the lives we lead and the world we live in. A story is a living thing. A story is something to which you owe a great deal of respect and responsibility. Cinema, on the other hand, can be extremely rigid. I feel that this inhibits Indigenous storytelling in many ways. Movies require an inordinate amount of planning, everything from shot lists to schedules to budgets and licensing agreements. Filmmaking can be extremely restrictive and demanding, with long, often frenetic hours. In independent filmmaking, much of the labor falls to one person or to a small team, not to a community or to a culture. If you, the filmmaker, the driving force behind the story, are holding yourself to an unhealthy standard, chances are that standard will be reflected onto your whole production. I think that the most important consideration in changing how films are made is to change how we think about hours. I see a lot of doctors, and my doctors hate my job. They hate my industry. The main issues discussed are often that those in the industry work too much and sleep too little, and frequently turn to substance abuse and self-medication to maintain professional performance, to keep their bodies moving, and to manage pain. In Ontario and in Canada, in federally regulated industries, the maximum number of hours most employees can be required to work in a day is 8 hours. The standard work week is 40 hours total. There are obvious exceptions in various different professions, but what I'm trying to draw attention to is that there is a recognized standard of what you can expect a worker to do. Like many of you watching, while working in this industry, I have worked 12-hour days and 16-hour days and 24-hour days. I have worked 6 and 7-day work weeks, and it became very quickly apparent to me that those hours are simply not feasible. And it's not what I want. It's just not the kind of life that I want to have. It's not the kind of career that I want to build. It's not safe. It's not safe for me. It's not safe for anybody or for any mind. At the time of recording, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees has called for a strike authorization vote, seeking more rest breaks and longer recovery periods between production days. There is currently a profile on Instagram called IA_stories, which features mostly anonymous confessionals from film and entertainment workers. And they are fairly excruciating reads. Fatigue-induced car accidents, near complete loss of self-preservation instinct, especially in regards to one's relational value to, say, a piece of equipment or media. Some of the stories include negative effects on family life, devastating impacts on one's physical or mental health, and most tragically, loss of life. No one, ever, should have to suffer or die for anyone's creative vision, for any production's demands, or any production's incompetence, ever. The normalization in this industry for these kinds of sacrifices, frankly, angers me to no end. The standard of labor within the film industry does not respect the labor rights of workers. In Canada, the 3 main rights of workers are the right to know, the right to participate, and the right to refuse. Workers have the right to know about workplace health and safety hazards, which during film production should include the impact of chronic sleep deprivation, overexertion. I feel it should also include the potential impact of triggering and/or traumatic story content on a worker's mental well-being, both in front of and behind the camera. Workers have the right to make recommendations about health and safety. This means open communication across production and a willingness to adapt and grow. Most importantly, workers have the right to refuse work if they believe it endangers their health and safety. So, when we're talking about accessibility in filmmaking, it's as much about preventing harm for all as it is about accommodating specific needs. My first recommendation is to change how we schedule things, how we plan productions, and how we adapt to footage and production limitations. Workdays consisting of 6 hours to 8 hours maximum, including guaranteed break periods and set up and tear down, should be common practice. Full stop. I personally try to not work more than 4 hours in a day. If you're familiar at all with spoon theory, wherein spoons represent units of energy that a person with a chronic illness or a disability has to work within a day, 4 hours is essentially all that my spoons will allow me to work if I want to continue to be able to work the next day and the day after that. I am also an advocate for 3 and 4 day work weeks. I am considering for my own personal onset protocol 3-day work weeks, which would consist of 2-day weekends and then 1 day onset, 1 day off, a second day onset, another day off, and a third day onset, and then a return to the 2-day weekend at the end of that. This could be used to manage staggered schedules so that workers are rested and able to stay on track. Possibility. I think it's a fairly attainable aspiration for my own practice, at least. In general, I feel that a 6 or 8 hour workday is more than possible, especially on small and independent productions, and our budgets and proposals should reflect that. Our plans should reflect that, and our stories can adapt to those limitations. It would possibly require higher salaries and or more extensive residual agreements just to make up for the lost hours, and that would need to be reflected in the budgeting process. I think that above all, hours and rest need to be considered while building a healthy work practice and creating accessible spaces. Content is another issue with accessibility in filmmaking. Disabled people are rarely depicted on screen, let alone with any accuracy, respect, or even by disabled actors. The needs of the audiences and the needs and limitations of the cast and crew are rarely considered during the writing process. This can be partly solved as simply as not including a strobe light effect or considering how a certain scene could be interpreted visually, inviting ample feedback during the creative process by a wide and diverse support system. Accessibility begins at the concept and writing stage, and it begins during research and development. Just to return to the potential impact of triggering and or traumatic story content on a worker's mental well-being and spiritual well-being, caring for the well-being of all in your production also includes content matter and the care and support you provide in relation to that content while filming and after production. As Indigenous filmmakers, it is becoming more commonplace to include spiritual and mental health support on set, often in the form of consulting elders and on-set therapists and counselors. imagineNATIVE has offered wonderful support during festivals for those who are impacted by triggering story content, and I'm really grateful for that practice. I think it is a beautiful and necessary thing, and that kind of care and support should be included in all of our budgets and proposals. Conversation has been going on about the responsibility of a production to provide mental health support, especially in productions with traumatic stories. On-set therapists and counselors are needed in these instances, and support must be available and ongoing throughout production and long after. Those who are struggling should not be neglected and should be not forced to advocate for themselves alone. I am personally prone to questioning the validity of triggering traumatic and or exploitative content matter. I think that exploring new and creative ways of processing and depicting traumatic histories can only benefit the practice of storytelling and collective wellness, especially culturally. We have an enormous responsibility as storytellers, not only to our audience, but also to the members of our cast and crew. Accessibility truly begins with the story. Films are made by many, and including as many people as possible in the development of a story and having that development continue through the production process with consideration to the needs and limitations of all involved is vital. No story is worth more than the health, safety, wellness, and lives of human beings. As storytellers, we are responsible for the impact of our stories. Accessibility needs to be considered during all parts of production. During the hiring process for production, for crew, for cast, what specific needs need to be accommodated on set, the standards of labor set for production, how disabled people are being represented on screen, and how a disabled audience is going to be able to access your film. Expenses such as captioned audio for deaf and hard of hearing audiences and described audio for blind and low vision audiences need to be on the very first draft of the budget. I myself often rely on captions just to be able to understand and enjoy a film. Audio description is something I'm just starting to learn about and am excited to incorporate into my practice. So if anyone watching has had a good experience with that process and with different services in Canada, please contact me. For those among us who are more financially oriented, disabled people represent a huge and underserved audience and offer an equally huge potential for profit. According to the 2016 Nielsen report, researching prevalent diverse consumers with disabilities, the quote, disabled market is massive, diverse, and worth well over $1 billion in the United States alone. Exclusion of this market is not only inconsiderate, it's financially inadvisable. I highly recommend that you do research on how to best represent your film to the disabled market and to take this into consideration while planning your film's lifetime. Regardless of profit, you want as many people as possible to be able to access your film. Accessibility needs on set will vary from production to production, and there will never be one singular perfect protocol that can be applied to every set. Some of the easier considerations would be wider pathways on set with room for wheelchair users, single floor locations with high quality ramps, reliable access to elevators, accessible, available bathrooms. Other considerations a mobility aid user would be able to advise you on as part of your team. Another consideration would be sign language interpreters, which itself is a fairly demanding position. Budgeting for things like travel support companions, and sleeping accommodations based on the individual needs of your collaborators. Disability support people based on individual need, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, on-set mental health support. Other important considerations would be various dietary restrictions and allergies, restricting use of scented products and perfumes on set, the location and placement of certain equipment. The most important thing about figuring out which protocol you need to establish for your set is to ask questions about accessibility needs and to create an environment wherein people feel safe enough to speak up and express their needs. An accessible production would function on mutual support. Accountability, communication, and professionalism all contribute to this network of mutual support. Full transparency, I am personally struggling with burnout and struggling quite a bit with my health because I have not figured out a way to do this yet that works for me. The thing about accessibility is that it requires a wider participation than just a handful of people or a new policy. Accessibility is something that we all have to find ways to participate in building every day. I am currently working on a protocol that I feel will work for myself, and I welcome conversation from all of you who are working to create more inclusive spaces wherever you can. Disabled filmmakers, please come and talk to me. Something important to consider as Indigenous and marginalized filmmakers is simply that there are many people in our communities who are living with disabilities. I have an acquired disability, a chronic illness, which was likely caused by environmental racism. I know that much of the medical neglect I have faced was caused by medical racism and misogyny. There are many people in my family and in my community who struggle with their health and with issues such as intergenerational trauma, ethnostress, chronic illness, injury, medical racism, neglect. Erasing that reality excludes a lot of our Indigenous family and community members. So, what kinds of considerations are being made for disabled Indigenous people on Indigenous sets and screening venues? What can be done better? When I started making films, it was just me and my camera pointed at whatever was the most beautiful thing. Blueberries on granite, bumblebee with thistle, water at the shore, whatever caught the light just so that could become a story by virtue of having been witnessed. My practice was very gentle. I essentially became a photographer and a filmmaker in response to my disability. I started carrying around a camera because my memory got so bad. There were simply too many moments in my life when I wished that my eyes had been camera lenses. In that way, I would be able to share the beautiful things I had seen, and I would have something to refer back to when I inevitably forgot. Another part of my practice is that my hands shake. My first documentary was filmed mostly on my phone, and in it, as in all of my films, my hands shake. They are not strictly good films. They are not strictly good images. Ito Steuer's In Defense of the Poor Image defines the poor image as a lumpen proletarian in the class society of appearances, or a ghost. I like that definition. A story can be everything and is always unfolding, rarely documented, and even when it is often shaky and blurred and out of focus and of poor resolution. I do not believe that this in any way impedes telling good stories, however they take shape. So I think also, in part of making filmmaking more accessible, it is questioning what we consider good images. To summarize, I think it's important to ask ourselves why we as marginalized filmmakers might conform to colonial and exclusionary standards of labor. Why do we emulate dangerous and unhealthy labor practices? This is not how our ancestors worked. Rest has always been important. Rest has always been a part of survival. If we understand that disability itself refers to a person's inability to participate and be productive as defined by a highly exploitative colonial capitalist system, we become aware of the working limitations of all bodies and recognize that many abled persons are themselves unable to keep up with an ever-accelerating environment. Ableism is itself a rejection of human impermanence and a rejection of the transience of the kind of help that conforms to productivity. When we recognize the fragility of all bodies and accept the limitations of all bodies, we welcome disabled artists, storytellers, collaborators, friends, and loved ones. I encourage you all to join me in the fight for access, inclusion, and participation of disabled people in the film industry. This will require lasting and systemic change. When it comes to accessibility in filmmaking, the means cannot justify the ends. Simple questions and considerations, intentional inclusion, and ongoing mutual advocacy can only be of benefit. Thank you very much, Timigwech, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.